did it. The team with dreams as large in scope as they were small in numbers had done it. 5 years of blood, sweat, and code paved the way for them to bring a new art form to their home, releasing a title that the rest of the industry envied and praised. In a year of innovators, they stood alongside them, paving the way for others to follow, who eagerly awaited them to lead once more. Max Payne's timing couldn't have been better, with The Matrix having introduced bullet time to a mainstream Western audience, a grounded setting being desired in gaming, and Rockstar planning to take the industry by storm. Remedy's years of hard work had paid off. Max Payne wasn't just acclaimed by players and critics at the time, it was attested to this day as one of the greats. The joys of grabbing everyone's attention from the professional teams and passionate fans was intoxicating. But Remedy would quickly feel the pressure that came from success. In the original Max Payne, there's a hidden radio that plays a recording of a real-life exchange with Rockstar. It's assumed that around this time, Rockstar were developing the console ports for Remedy's PC title, and luckily for both parties, the game's success only made its console counterparts an easy sell. Having become one of the biggest publishers in the industry virtually overnight in 2001, Rockstar knew better than to put all of their eggs in one basket. Having released their acclaimed action title just a few months prior, Remedy were offered to sell the Max Payne brand outright to Rockstar, and the finished developer accepted. For gamers, Max Payne was something experienced in the summer of 2001, but for Remedy, 5 years of their lives were dedicated to the project. It dominated their creative minds for half a decade, so it's only natural that despite Max Payne's success and innovation, the team would be itching for new ideas. In that context, it's easy to see why Remedy sold their property, especially considering the deal Rockstar proposed. The finished developer would receive $10 million and be given double Max Payne's budget to make a sequel, one developed by the same creative team that made the original, right down to Scott Miller and George Broussard from 3D Realms being producers. Apogee had no rights to the franchise anymore, but Rockstar allowed them to stay on board, not wanting to rock the boat that shipped Remedy's product. Sam Lake, Remedy's creative director, stated that this opportunity was a nice way of saying goodbye. Rockstar had their demands, specifically that the sequel needed to be delivered in a timely fashion. Remedy wouldn't be altering their gameplay structure as they did with the original, requiring that the studio organized its schedule and pursue ambitions within reach. But that's not to suggest that this was unreasonable. Remedy wouldn't need to spend years building a formula. They already had a strong blueprint to begin with, and Rockstar would assist in development, such as gathering photographs for comic panels and textures directly from New York, where they were located. The larger budget gave Remedy access to proper motion capture, stuntmen, and professional actors for the character models and cutscenes. While this may appear to be a safely made sequel, Remedy hadn't simply crafted Max Payne with a texture pack. Their in-house engine was upgraded to utilize the Havoc physics engine, one of the earliest games to do so. Bullet time had been revamped and levels addressed the original's criticisms. Fan-made projects inspired the team to release mod tools from launch day. Remedy took full advantage of their established knowledge and experience, and with great cooperation with Rockstar and 3D Realms, Max Payne 2 was announced in 2002 and released for PC the following year. As discussed in previous installments, Max Payne's gameplay was far ahead of its time, controlling more like the cinematic action games of the 7th generation than the earliest of third-person shooters. Remedy had a head start from the moment their sequel began development, needing to only tweak the formula in a few but crucial areas. To correct an error made in the last video, the original Max Payne does allow you to separate bullet time and the leap function. There's no excuse or particular reason why I missed this, I just did. My apologies. That its sequel bothers to default this, however, is indicative of some of the goals and changes made here. Whereas combat in the original played out like a navigational puzzle, the sequel is much more direct. Max Payne's iconography is dual-wielding MAC-10s while leaping through the air, but in reality, gameplay required caution. Multiple sections didn't allow running and gunning at all, and frankly, these were some of the weakest sections of the game. Dodging enemy fire in bullet time, leaping around corners, and dodging explosives is what makes Remedy's action titles stand out from the abundance of shooters on the market, and at moments, the game didn't showcase that. The fall of Max Payne tries to settle this by ramping up the gun battles beyond that of its inspiration, with many enhancements. Immediately, this sequel stimulates each of the senses much better than its prequel. Camera movements are smooth and atmospheric. The sound design is superb with layers of ambience, voices, weather, and weapons. And the level of interactivity is combined with a physics engine, making the world even more believable. Comic panels look gorgeous with improved filters, appearing professional instead of amateur. Music integration is more seamless and subtle. And most importantly, your own inputs feel tighter and more responsive. The big reason Max Payne felt like a rhythm game is that bullets were relatively slow and weapons had a very large spread. Where you shot targets wasn't important compared to the order you shot them in. During its best moments, this made Max Payne exciting, yet strategic. During its worst, your success depended on a damaged dice roll, and using the F5 key like a teenager's sock. From the start, weapons in Max Payne 2 are more accurate, and bullets travel at a much greater speed. Enemies don't just fall over, but are forced back from your gunshots. The enhancements to presentation here aren't simply to make for a prettier game, they're multi-purposed. The physics engine isn't simply good for scripted cutscenes, it gives weapons a sense of weight, explosions affect the environment along with its victims, and in design, adds tension from utilizing cover that isn't permanent. The same can be said in regards to sound design. Weapons are no longer muted, they're loud and distinct. The environmental effects such as thunderstorms can shake the room. Bullet time's fluid with ambience and varying speeds. It even improves storytelling, which I'll discuss in that section. All of these subtle but significant improvements can also be found in control and design. Max can throw grenades while carrying a weapon. He can shoot while lying on the ground by holding down the fire key. And bullet time is much smoother, partly due to the motion blur effects that hold up today, but mostly due to how it functions. Judging from reviews at the time and in personal experience, this is Max Payne 2's biggest change, with bullet time slowing down after each kill. It is exhilarating to use, charging into the fray with 2 bullet hoses, moving at a speed that make Neo run for a payphone, leading to the iconic reload animation that has Max spinning to dodge incoming fire. Even the level design has received its tweaks. The improved graphics make each location more distinct than the original. Cheap enemy spawn points have been cleaved entirely. NPCs can assist you in combat. There's a greater variety in gameplay between shootouts, nightmares, exploration, and set pieces. The fall of Max Payne doesn't play at all like something from 2003. The polish in the original that I said hasn't endured over 16 years, in so many ways has with this. I believed it for years to be a textbook sequel. But we're not finished yet. I mentioned that Max Payne is seemingly a precursor to the third-person shooters and action titles of the 7th generation due to its elegance and cinematic style. Yet many of the complaints with these types of games can be made with this classic, and in many ways that negatively differ from the original. Max Payne's comic panel cutscenes were an ingenious workaround the very rough 3D cutscenes made back then, and in Max Payne 2, thanks to the assistance from Rockstar, a higher budget, and more experience, they're gorgeous to look at. I've read comics with inferior artwork, and using professional actors instead of sketches gives them a unique style to this day. But with Remedy's greatly improved engine, the fall of Max Payne features quite a few in-engine cutscenes. Whereas the original only used them to set the stage, this time, nearly every level has numerous perspective changes and angles. They're neatly edited and shot, making them discreet during a first playthrough. But once their presence is registered, the frequency begins to frustrate, mostly in how they unnecessarily interrupt gameplay, where even the first proper level can be used as a demonstration. What normally would have had the player navigate cuts to a cinematic, back to back. Why couldn't the Dick Justice TV show just be encountered naturally? Why does Max need to hold up his first suspect to the wall in a cinematic? The NPC could have put his hands up during gameplay. These wouldn't even require dialogue changes. It would only save the developer's time crafting a cutscene that may need to be adjusted later. The character models and graphics were very impressive in 2003, but despite aging much better than the original, they have decayed. That would normally be forgivable, but this is the very problem Remedy used comic panels to avoid, yet they were seduced by their own technology here. And it's not just in quieter moments, it happens during action-packed levels as well. It will cut to an enemy to showcase the physics, Mona firing an SMG in bullet time, or Max pulling off the BioWare face. Now, this could have been done to make each graphic novel scene more memorable, One criticism with the original is how often you'd abruptly switch between gameplay and comic panels, on occasion with music that drastically changed the tone. Max Payne 2 doesn't have this, but instead of fixing a problem, it's replaced with another that ends up having greater implications than the former. This interruption of gameplay is the hardest to ignore while using mods, which usually require their own unique levels for the full enjoyment. In fairness, this is a rare context, and if a game's going to be judged solely on a first playthrough, this change can even be seen as a benefit. It makes certain kills rather satisfying, and can potentially heighten the game's cinematic style. But this series is about examining games closely, and ultimately, I feel that the choice detracts from later playthroughs, lacks substance, and goes against Remedy's own intentions. The biggest concern after this is in regards to Max Payne 2's changes to bullet time. While it may be exhilarating, especially during the early hours, the vulnerability that made Max easier to connect with is gone. You can juggle bodies in the air, take on an entire squad, and then there's his sheer speed. Bullet time is so effective that when Max kills these enemies, the next ones are still turning around by the time they're dead. It utterly neuters the shoot-dodge function. There's no logical reason to activate it due to it slowing you down, whereas just activating bullet time allows you to always be on your feet. Dead on Arrival makes Go Easy on Me look like Cuphead. There's nothing that resembles a remote challenge, except for the game's worst level, that is, prepare to be shocked, an escort mission. Perfect for a game that compromises difficulty, strategy, and depth to encourage an aggressive playstyle. Now, I realize this section is making Max Payne 2 seem like a failed sequel, and just like my criticisms with the original Max Payne, that's not the intention. But alike many sequels, whereas Max Payne is a flawed but consistent experience, Max Payne 2 features greater highs and lows. For the important first playthrough, it's absolutely a more satisfying game than the original, but upon closer inspection, the gameplay has very tangible problems, and is in a way a shadow of things to come in regards to cinematics and how they work together with interactivity. Max Payne 2's gameplay is a blast, but its depth isn't limitless. At some point the bottom can be reached, and it can suffer as a result. The question is, can the same thing be said for Remedy's greater ambition, the story? After Max Payne, Sam Lake began studying screenwriting, coming back to his colleagues with a script that was 3 times longer than the originals, due to crafting a more detailed and ambitious tale. In Max Payne, our protagonist's story was straightforward revenge, but surrounding Max's journey was a web of characters, conflicts, and schemes that went far beyond his ground-level viewpoint. Max's goal was black and white, but the stories around him were shades of gray that influenced his life. The fall of Max Payne changes this, creating a multi-threaded narrative that jumps in its character and chronology repeatedly. Gray morality is caught up with Max himself, withholding evidence, aiding a hired killer, and murdering a fellow detective. The charismatic lead who only faced the city's evil is confronted with lust, guilt, and ignorance. The fall of Max Payne's tone is altered in ways that's rather opposite to gameplay. Where the original was violent, visceral, and horrific, the sequel is moody, somber, and existential. From the start, it's an emotional yet logical direction for the series. The recap that details the most important plot points, along with redesigns of each character, helps the player relate to Max, understanding that his short-term satisfaction was just that. The fall of Max Payne doesn't have the immediate empathy and relatability of its predecessor with his family gone, so it uses mystery instead. The game visits the manor now multiple times, using it to frame the narrative, and what it demonstrates clearly is the presentation. Not just technically with heavily improved comic panels that combine with excellent sound design and music, but artistically. There's so many tiny details that add to it, both old and new, such as framing in the manor to make it look like Mona is standing, effectively masking the scene's tragedy later. Fixtures that detail future plot points or characters, such as Max listing recent achievements with the NYPD, ignoring those made during his family years, while Winterson only has 2 pictures relating to her blind son. The pathway in Mona's funhouse that breaks can be heard snapping the first time Max walks across it in Act 1, and even more than the original, the parallels to Max's life. The deputy chief's addiction to painkillers, the TV shows that follow his past and current life, telephone recordings that do anything from amplify Max's desperation and lust for Mona to Winterson's relationship with Vladimir Lem. It once again separates Remedy from the rest of the action genre. The layers to the narrative are something you can endlessly sink your teeth into, but to do so isn't as easy as before, because the plot itself isn't straightforward. This is largely because while Max Payne had multiple characters and motivations, there was the titular character to latch onto, with a storyline so basic a monkey could follow it. Man's family is killed, he finds out who did it, and kills them back. Max's journey in the sequel is about him stumbling into a murder case that involves Vladimir Lem and Mona Sachs, the latter of whom he's attracted to but is the chief suspect in a colleague's case, while he's fighting off gangsters away from Vladimir, who was a part of the secret society that helped out Max before but without telling Max, and this just gets more complicated. It's small wonder why the script was 3 times longer when finding that it involves in total Max's relationship with a femme fatale assassin, Winterson's relationship with Max's Russian gangster friend. That said Russian gangster friend was the apprentice of Alfred Woden, who bailed out Max Payne, a new enemy known as the Cleaning Company Commandos that are first a mystery, then belonging to Vinny Gognitti, then the Inner Circle, then Vladimir, and that said Inner Circle is in a civil war. The good thing about this setup is that once again, the world exists far beyond Max's grasp. The narrative hints at this further with our protagonist and antagonist discussing the philosophical challenges of free will and emotion. The writing itself has certainly improved. Sam Lake was a natural, and with professional tutoring, only grew. The prose here are much more meaningful and elegant. That and each character leaves some sort of an impact on Max, emotionally, mentally, or both. There's a handful of lines that are rather plain about Max's nihilism, but they're not overbearing and made to give contrast to the conclusion. It doesn't have the unavoidable fourth wall breaking from before, but it's still laced with references, parallels, and foreshadowing. In general, the sequel is intelligently selective about what to take from the original and what to leave behind, or repurpose. An example of the latter is the campiness. Remedy have a good sense of humor and wear the entertainment from Max Payne's unintentional hilarity with a smile. They've learned what many serious game writers struggle with, that giving the player control means no matter what, humor can and will occur anywhere. Great camp is like a great joke, where its frequency is crucial to the enjoyment. As entertaining as it would have been to have this face appear during Max Payne 2's story, it'd only be repeating the original, and in a plot that's much darker. Making graphic novel cutscenes with employees and locals standing in for actors was the right decision for Max Payne, but hiring professional actors and enhancing production across the board was the right call for Max Payne 2. It allowed Remedy to concentrate on their best work, only needed more due to their tighter schedule. And it wasn't completely gone. Remedy still featured themselves in the TV parodies that were only expanded from the original, going as far as using their old name for Max Payne, Dick Justice, to turn the original Max Payne into a blaxploitation parody, or taking the exaggerated expressions Sam Lake popularized and making them even more absurd. There's plenty of fun to be had amidst the downpour of drama, most of which is sparked by the romance between Max Payne and Mona Sachs. Sam Lake had originally killed off the femme fatale, but due to a colleague's wishes, let her escape in the elevator off-screen. It's a good thing too, because without her character, this story wouldn't work. It'd be a simple war between Max and Vladimir, whereas with the pairing's sexual tension comes hypocrisy and tragic irony. Surprisingly, despite the game's subtitle and memory, its romance is far more reserved than most, but the perspective changes between Max and Mona cement their connection. The sniping section itself is one of the weaker sections in terms of design, not providing much challenge or excitement, but in how it ties together with the characters through dialogue is great. It's also in this level when things come to a head. It's a moment of no return for Max, and can be argued, is what pushes Vladimir. Like before, there's not a lot of concrete plot details, but that's because Remedy's writing is subtle, instead of lacking. It's hard to know how involved Detective Winterson is in her lover's criminal underworld, but she's willing to do exactly what Payne will, ending their lives to protect what she loves. And it's here that I believe is what separates Max Payne 2's storytelling compared to its predecessor.
No, Mona. Winterson! Gunfire! This way, fast!
The sound effects, editing, and pacing is utterly captivating, and in a way that's still unique to the fall of Max Payne today. There's nothing amateurish about this scene or indeed any other moment. It's really the sound design that completes the cinematics. Had the original single music piece in the comic panels played during these moments, it lacked the suspense and contrast we see. Music is something I didn't discuss previously, and that was largely due to not having a lot to delve into. The original Max Payne has a great main theme, but it's played far too often, and its assortment of industrial tunes with blaring guitars and drum machines hadn't really meshed with Max's noir inspirations. That's not to say the music needs to appeal to all conventions. One of my favorite game scores is Call of Duty World at War, specifically because it wasn't afraid to use synthesizers or guitars to illustrate the brutality of World War II. But in Max Payne, it felt like something to accompany only the action, without accounting for the environment or atmosphere. Max Payne 2 doesn't have this problem. It's done by the same composers as before, but the instrumentation isn't at any point obnoxious, and effectively conveys the atmosphere of every level. Mona's themes are seductive, Vladimir's are suspicious, and Max's are lonely. There's plenty of variations too, allowing a single track to split up into 4 songs, where a single instrument is all that's needed to carry the tone. While it's a brief score, it's got every bit of weight required, from isolated and soft instruments to overwhelming orchestras. But as great as the main theme is, my favorite track has to go to Duty vs. Passion. Max Payne 2 doesn't have the controversy of its follow-up, but that doesn't mean it lacks discussion. Its most notable points are Vladimir Lem's betrayal and the death of Mona Sachs. Vladimir was a very likable character, not only for assisting Max, but also in his choice of words, even smiling like a child simply by getting to quote The Godfather. But that, I think, is what makes his betrayal work. Unlike most games that play out exactly like that Pro ZD skit, Vladimir's influence over Max and in turn, the player, is built steadily and is used more to show Max's ignorance rather than Vladimir's evil. The Russian's appearances in the original were very convenient, and it's evident when learning that he's a part of the inner circle how much he's using Max to do his dirty work, to the point in Max Payne 2 where he's even branching out into legitimate businesses using his enemy's property. Max Payne 2 doesn't treat Vlad's manipulation as a revelation. It's a natural development, and Max is partially aware of it, but too focused on Mona to truly acknowledge it until Alfred Woden tells him. But he doesn't suddenly become a cartoonish bad guy with no morals, as some say. I think Vladimir is being honest when he says he hates having to shoot Max, but has to, as he's the man that killed his lover, Winterson. Alfred's appearance actually had me thinking the plot had a major hole. Much of the story can be cut down if Max simply called Alfred Woden right from the start, but Vladimir brings up something we discussed before, that Woden is responsible for getting Max's wife and daughter killed. At first I thought this was simply added to remind the player, but now I believe it's placed to show why Max didn't call Woden. When Max eventually does, he leaves a message saying, "You still owe me." And it's due to this hesitation that things only get worse, which all ties into the grand finale. From the opening cutscene, the fall of Max Payne is about the past, how running from it only allows it to consume you, and that the only true way to overcome it is to confront it, to risk the damage and madness that comes from facing it until you're truly set free. For Max, that damage is the death of Mona. This scene is the most tragic in the game. Her death is due to their connection. Remedy themselves even got hate mail for killing her like this, and I think that's indicative of the scene's power. The alternate ending earned for beating the game on its highest difficulty is a neat bonus, but Mona's survival only negates the tragedy of this scene. Without her death, it's pointless, because there's no consequences. Max's final words, that despite everything, it is what shaped him into someone reborn, someone who's overcome what's burdened them for years, is what makes Max Payne 2 such a beautiful story. Max Payne 2 is a challenging game to break down. It's easy to see why it's considered the best by many fans, but having more than doubled the hours I spent with it all those years ago, it's also understandable why some prefer the original, with its tougher gameplay that's more prominent. Yet, despite all of the changes and differences between Max Payne 1 and 2, this video's conclusion is unavoidably similar to the last one. Max Payne 2 isn't meant to be an experience that's pummeled with session after session, maintaining longevity through death matches, vast worlds, or dozens of hours of content. It's purpose-built to provide an expertly crafted single-player experience, whose memory will last a lifetime. Max Payne 2 is one of the best sequels out there, using the original to provide something new and familiar. It was the best goodbye Remedy could give.